Hey everyone, welcome back to a new episode of Little Shop of Nerds. I'm Julia.
Mike.
And last week's episode was about Quiet on Set. It has been brought to our attention that there has been a fifth episode that has come out, and we will not be covering it because from what I understand is that it doesn't add anything new to what was discussed in the documentary. We think it was just a special, so we won't be covering that.
All right.
So, last week's hint was scratch that and reverse it.
Yeah.
And so that's getting a little tongue-tied. So what we're going to be talking about this week is Wonka.
Wonka, the 2023 movie that came out this past year. It stars Timothy Chalamet, some great actors, and this is mostly the beginning story before Wonka and his factory, Charlie and the Golden Tickets, and before he get in the Oompa Loompa. So, if you guys are not familiar with Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, it's a book written by Ralph Dahl.
Raoul Dahl.
Raoul Dahl.
Something like that.
If he's the author who wrote many books like The Witches, that's when we got the 1980s movie and the crappy remake for HBO Max. Then you might know the BFG, Big Friendly Giant. He wrote many, and James and the Giant Peach.
Yep.
If you read those books, kudos. And before we get to it, yes, he was a racist. We're not going to sugarcoat it. He was, even in the original Charlie and the Chocolate Factory book, his original idea for the Oompa Loompas were small, was it pygmies?
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, we know, and we don't condone that. So, but today we're just talking about the movie, which is not part of any canon.
Now, they kind of, in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, the 2005 version, with Johnny Depp, they did kind of do, like, a little backstory for Willy Wonka, which is his dad was a dentist, and wouldn't let him have chocolate and candy, so then he left, just ran away from home one day, and just became a chocolatier, candy maker, whatever, So this one is actually just a bit different.
But you know what's funny? Like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory with Johnny Depp, the focus was more on Willy Wonka. But when Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory in the 1970s was focused on Charlie, you ever thought of that though?
Mm-hmm.
And before you get there, watch the original Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. And the book is called Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. They messed up. They had to use Willy Wonka because of some kind of product thing.
But I actually like both versions of Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory.
Yeah.
I like them both. I know a lot of people prefer Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, but I actually kind of prefer Charlie and the Chocolate Factory just because I just like Johnny Depp.
I like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory because it's more based on the book. Great movie, great based on the book, done very well. But there's times I felt like the kid who played Charlie with the Johnny Depp version, he just kept acting really perfect, really nice, and it's like I didn't feel like I relate because he's a kid.
Yeah.
But when you see the kid in the Gene Wilder one, he acts more like a kid. He wants to dream big. He gets in trouble. That's more relatable, but I digress. But besides that, go watch those two, then come back, go watch Wonka, come back. Like I said, Wonka is pretty much the beginning story. It starts Timothy Chalamet as Wonka, which he does pretty good.
He does really well.
Does very well. Like in the movie, he kind of does a little thing with Gene Wilder, a little bit with Johnny Depp. Like, there's part where he says, nearly, that's the word. I got nearly, not even close, got to a nibble. I'm like, okay, that just sounds like Johnny Depp right there.
Yeah. Yeah, so it starts off with Wonka coming into, I think it's Paris?
Something.
Or it's somewhere in France.
It's
I think it's somewhere in France.
somewhere in Europe.
He's coming in on a boat. Because he had been... Excuse me?
A cook, very much.
Yeah, he had been, doing something, like, I guess, cooking for 7 years. He had been, like, out on sea for 7 years or something like that. And he was just now coming back because now he had, now was his time to open up his chocolate shop and just start selling his candy.
Yeah, because, like, he's been out in sea,
perfecting his candy
making skills,
gathering ingredients,
getting some ingredients, like I said. And before you guys wonder what year it takes place, it doesn't give a year, but I looked it up. It takes place somewhere in the 1940s, 25 years before, Charlie. So at least we know that much.
Yeah. So he's going through, and he only had like a few pieces of like a few coins on him.
Sovereigns, yes.
Yeah, and he sings this song about how he has all this money and he's really excited, but as the day goes through, he just starts losing it because he gets conned into doing some things.
Yeah,
and then
like he needed a map, which not too much of a sovereign. So he gets ready to walk. He sees a kid shining his shoes. Gives him a sovereign, and he goes to a fruit stand. He's holding a pumpkin, and like a bell goes off. He drops it by accident. He's like, 3 sovereigns. I'm like,
yes, he had to pay for that.
And then she's like, you broke my pumpkin. You buy it. I'm like, I hate that.
Yeah.
I get it because it is policy, but that's a stupid policy. But okay, fine.
And then he is trying to find a place to stay. I think is what it was. And he came upon this woman who had a baby, and she came up to him and she asked him for like if he had like a sovereign or something to spare, and he gave her 1 because I think he had 2 left or 2 or 3 left, and he gave her 1 or 2.
And he had 1 silver sovereign. And here's the thing that if you look at, it's like a little Easter egg. He said he had 1 little silver sovereign, so he flips it and goes into his pocket, comes out a hole in his pocket, and goes into the storm drain. I'm like, oh, that's a clever Easter egg.
Yeah, so then he's sitting on a bench, and because he is fully prepared to spend the night on the bench, makes himself some hot chocolate and everything like that. And then this creepy dude shows up and was like, I got a place for you to stay.
And his name is Mr. Bleach. He has a pit bull or something?
Something like that, yeah.
And I noticed throughout the movie, that dog is just CGI. I'm like, I know a couple animals they had to make CGI because they're wild animals. But with the dog, you just couldn't get a regular dog.
Well, I can understand maybe why they did CGI, but we'll get to that when we get to that part.
Yeah, but besides that, why the dog was kind of barking at him and tugging at his pants because he likes chasing mailmen. And Wonka was wearing mailman pants.
Yeah, so, what is it, Mr. Bleach?
Mr. Bleach. He has, this rough voice. His voice kind of reminds me of a cartoon villain voice.
Yes. So, they end up taking him to this place that he could stay. And they said it was going to be, 6 sovereigns or something?
No, it was a sovereign. It just cost a sovereign if you didn't have any money. If you can find a way to scrounge up a sovereign, you can just pay, the time you check out. And the name is Mrs. Scrubbit.
Yeah, and
her name is Mrs. Scrubbit.
Yeah, and she's giving him she gave him the VIP treatment or something like that.
And I think he had to sign a contract. And if you look at it, it's a long contract with small words, and I'm like,
And there was also a little girl that was trying to get his attention to tell him not to sign it. But Wonka couldn't read.
that's the messed up part.
So he couldn't read this contract, so he had no idea what this contract said. Because he said something about as long as you can sign your name, you don't need to be able to read or something like that.
Yeah, and I'm like, looking at this contract, I'm like, this kind of reminds me of Willy Wonka, another maybe Easter egg, I could be wrong. But yeah, the little girl who told her to read the small print, her name is Noodle.
Yeah.
Uh,
Because we find this out later, but it's because of a necklace that she had that had an N on it.
yes, and we'll tell you about that later. Willie tells Mrs. Scruppet who he is. He says, I'm Mike, a magician of candy making, and he pulls out it's a teapot out of his hat, and he keeps trying to find his chocolate, and he can't find it, and just pulls out carrots. He's like, "That's for my stew." I'm like, that we'll get to that later, but he does that, gets signed up, goes to his room, and gets ready for the next day.
Yeah, so the next day he goes to the
Gallery Gourmet.
Yeah, and he sees the place that he wants to. Oh, I remember how he lost one of his other sovereigns. He went to the gallery the day before.
Yes, the gallery.
And he was daydreaming. And he had to pay a sovereign.
Yes.
Yeah, so he goes back and he's daydreaming again. But this time he doesn't get caught. Well, then he starts selling his chocolate. Well, the big names, Slugworth.
Was it Frigogubrin or Prospers?
I can look it up real quick.
Alright, yeah, I shall look it up.
Well, just keep talking about something.
Okay. When she's looking up, I'll just say this. If you...
Don't sing. Please don't sing.
Okay. At least we... Okay, if you guys want to know more about Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, to read about the book, go find it at your nearest bookstore, or do it like everyone else. Look it up.
Okay, so it does not say.
If you need a nice, good caffeine high, go to your local convenience store and get a thing of an energy drink.
Yeah, it just says here, to pay them off, Wonka introduces hover chocolates that make people fly, facing opposition from 3 rival chocolatiers who call the chief of police to confiscate Wonka's earnings for disrupting trade and selling without a chocolate store.
Yes. Thank you.
We are... Anyways, okay, so there's Arthur Slugworth.
Which is also in the book. Charlie and Chocolate Factory books.
Let's see. I'm trying to... The only one that they've really mentioned...
Frico Gruber. That's the second one.
Okay.
And Protnose. Okay. And one thing about Protnose, he's bald and he wears a wig, which you can tell. But he also wears this mustache, looks a little...
Hitlery.
Too much like Hitler, pretty much. I'm like, I was watching the whole movie. I'm like watching this movie, and I'm looking at him like, okay, does anyone not see the Hitler mustache? I'm like, that is definitely a Hitler mustache.
Yeah.
I'm like, what the hell? And I'm like, oh, it's a Ralph Dahl thing. Raoul Dahl, I get it, but still. I'm like, but yes, he is selling his hover choc, and he says they're made from like some kind of flea, like bug cocoon, and with mix of chocolates, marshmallow, caramel. Each of these, like I said, Slugworth, Potnose, and Frigogoober, they all eat it. Slugworth says, marshmallow. And he says, yeah, I got this from this country. He said, Frigogoober was like caramel. And he says it's salty. It's like salted caramel. And he says, from a tear from a Russian clown. And Protno says cherries, and he said he got the cherries from Japan.
Mhm.
But besides that, and they said, Slugworth said, you would think he would give him a good review on it, but he says it's the worst. And he says, you hear it, folks. And he's like, wait, the worst? He's like, because here's the thing. Wonka made actually good chocolate, but he says what you did was weird. I'm like, you say it's good, but yet you say it's weird too. I'm like, what the fuck's wrong with you? You're fucking terrible. But
Well, I mean, they just didn't want
competition.
Competition because we find this out. Well, we're not going to get into that because we don't want to ruin it yet.
Yeah. But he says, well, if you don't like that, you're not going to see what happens. And pretty much the cocoon they use for the cocoon that the chocolate is made out of had the bugs inside of them make people fly. Kind of like the fizzy lifty drinks in Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory or Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Yeah.
But the chief of police comes and they confiscate his earnings, so then Wonka has nothing.
And the guy who plays the chief of police, you know him as Michael Keegan.
No, Keegan-Michael Key.
Keegan-Michael Key. Yeah, sorry, I don't know why I mixed that up.
Yeah.
But it's like, you might know him from Key and Peele. He did some other movies. You might know him from as the substitute teacher who says, hey, Ron, or D nice. But yes, he plays the chief of police.
Yeah. So, I think they do end up giving him a sovereign because he needed it to pay his room. But then when he got back to pay the sovereign, she was like, no, it was much more than what she had agreed because of all of the things that she did the night before and the VIP treatment and everything. I think it was like 10 sovereigns or something
10,000 sovereigns or something, but it was like in the thousands. I think it is 1,000, but she's naming off like the list of what he did, like going up and down the stairs. I'm like,
using the bar of soap in his room.
But she says mini bar. She's like, mini bar. And she says mini bar of soap. I'm like, okay, I get that. But still, charges. I'm like, that is like a huge scam.
Yeah.
It's like one of those hotels you go to fucking Las Vegas that you don't want to be in.
Yeah, so he ended up getting he basically became a slave. He got thrown into the basement with all the other people that couldn't pay. And I think they said it was going to take him like 10 years to pay off his debt or something like that.
And they say it's a sovereign a day. I'm like, okay, that doesn't add up.
Yeah.
I'm like, because even I'm like,
I mean, they can't see what you're doing, Mike. So.
I don't know, but if you count your fingers or count whatever right, that does not add up.
Yeah, so he gets put into like this crappy room, and then him and like everybody else is talking like through the windows, and he's like giving them chocolate and everything.
Well, it was like before that. It was Noodle comes, tells her, hey, I told you to read the contract, the fine print, and he says, he says he had a problem with that, and she says, you can't read. He's like, I focused most of my education on making chocolate. And she's like, she says she never had chocolate. She's like, what, you never had chocolate? He's like, still no. And, he made a little thing of chocolate in his suitcase because he has a little mini factory in there. And tells him about his life story about his mother, and his mother was a chef, but it was a poor chef. It was like they lived on a river with their boat, and she asked, like, did you ever want to be a chocolate maker? He said, no, I wanted to be a magician, and he does some stuff that a magician would do, and I'm like, actually, that makes sense because all the stuff from Wonka, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. Charlie in the Chocolate Factory looked like a magician. Okay, I get it. Mm-hmm. But besides that, he tells the whole story.
Yeah, because he basically became a chocolate maker because of his mom after she had passed away.
And he gave her a little thing of chocolate.
that she made for his birthday.
Mm-hmm. She would gather enough cocoa beans, and it was that one piece of chocolate that she would make, and I'm like, huh, okay. Because if you like I said, this comes back to Charlie in the Chocolate Factory or Willy Wonka in the Chocolate Factory. Charlie only gets one bar a year for his birthday, pretty much, and that's how it did in the Willy Wonka movie, in the Wonka movie.
Yeah.
And she would get cocoa beans, make actually homemade chocolate.
Yeah. And she would, like, write Wonka on them and, like, cover it in some sort of fabric with the name written on it. And so he has the last piece of chocolate that she had made, and he hasn't eaten it yet. But we will get to that later.
And, and Noodle feels bad. And he says, no, what about this? If you help me escape every day, like, let me go out, make some chocolate, sell it, I'll give you a life supply. And she's like, are you nuts? And he gets an idea how they can do it. And how to distract Mrs. Scrubbit. And Mrs. Scrubbit is into lords.
Yeah, so they made Mr. Bleacher think that he was like
a descendant
of some sort of lord, and they made him put on like these
lederhosens.
Yeah,
it's like a lederhosen. I think is something that you wear in Germany. It's like
shorts, like an overall type short outfit
with the fucking knee-high socks, and I'm like,
well, Mrs. Scrubbit went for it.
And Wonka, and they were ready to go do their work, and he's like, Wonka's trying to tell Mr. Bleach, he's like, oh, she's madly in love with you. And
it's Bleacher, by the way.
Bleacher.
Yeah.
Well, he says, she's madly in love with you. Mrs. Scrubbit. He's like, Scrubbit, yeah. And he's like, telling him what to do. Like, shave, like, groom up, and tell him to wear, like, saying, she'll what?
She'll fall for him or something like that.
He says she'll sigh if you show some thigh. I'm like, oh my god.
Yeah, so he does this and she goes for it. And while they're like canoodling in the main area, they actually manage to get Wonka out. And
he builds like this machine that makes him do his job, and he uses the dog to pretty much run on a treadmill.
Which is probably why they use CGI for the dog.
I get that. Yeah, I get that. I get that for that scene, but for the rest, I'm like, okay. But besides that, it was.
I mean, I honestly couldn't tell that the dog was CGI.
It's nowadays CGI is getting better, but still, you don't want to do it too much because it's going to be. It's like with the Speed Racer movie. It was like pretty much had real people, but the whole world was CGI. Oh. And you can tell how.
I mean, I've never watched Speed Racer, so.
Yeah, you understand that. Yeah, I get that, but I watched it. It's not a bad movie, but when the whole world is CGI and only people are not CGI, it's like. It makes it more unrealistic.
Yeah.
But besides that, they escape. He escapes through the. Know how they do it, in those old prison movies, being in a laundry cart with a bunch of hiding in a laundry bag, whatever.
Yeah.
And he's like, pulls out a jar of candy, but he didn't have it in there. It was empty.
Yeah, because. Isn't that when
the Oompa Loompa named Lofty, played by Hugh Grant, but that's not till later. He says, Noodle's like, where is it? She's like, okay, I'll tell you what happened. They were stolen by a little orange man with green hair. Every time I make a batch, he steals it in my sleep. And she's like, she doesn't believe him because she said, You were dreaming about an orange man with green hair while you were eating in your sleep. I'm like, well, that could be a possibility.
Mm-hmm.
But she's like, they ran out of milk. She said, well, no problem. This is during the time where milkman was still a thing.
And they would leave milk on your doorstep.
And she's like, here you go. He's like, A, that's stealing. And C, I don't use regular old cow milk. I use giraffe milk. I'm like...
Yeah. So they had to sneak into the zoo.
And they give this security guard a truffle, like a little chocolate truffle. And it has, like, every alcohol in it. And it's supposed to be night of the town. I'm like, I get it, like the ever favorite gum.
Mm-hmm.
And he puts it in. One is, champagne. One was red wine.
Mm-hmm.
And
eventually he gets drunk and passes out.
Yeah. Yes, and I'm like, okay, I want that.
Yeah. So they get him, because what they said was they just kind of framed it as like a special gift from management or something for him doing such a good job, or him being there for a year or something like that.
And so that's why there's only a small piece.
Yeah. So he eats it, and then they sneak in, and they this is when we find out more about Noodle. And I think that's when we find out about her necklace and how she doesn't remember her parents or anything like that.
And they they go to the, she gives the whole backstory, and she sings a little song about being with someone. And Wonka keeps trying to rhyme her name with something. He's like, nothing rhymes with Noodle.
Mm-hmm.
And they do a little dance thing, get the milk from the giraffe, they fly in the air with the flamingos.
Yeah.
And that's where they ran into the chief of police. And he's like, oh, before the everything, we'll tell you about that later, but he threatens Wonka saying, don't make chocolate. He's like, what? Oh, you're being smart. Puts his head into the fountain again. He's like, water in my ears. Oh yeah. It's like, I'm sorry, I don't want to do this. I don't want you to do this. You don't get it. I have to. If you don't, you're going to get more than a bonk on the head. It's like, I don't have a bonk on the head. It's like, oh, where's my head at?
And then he bonks him on the head. Yeah. So, so Wonka gets threatened not to make chocolate again, but that doesn't really stop him.
No.
Because with the help of the other people that were held captive by Mrs. Strubbit, they devise a way for him to sell chocolate, and eventually they start making money on it.
Yes.
Because every time the police would come to confiscate his chocolate, he would disappear.
Yeah. And before that, there was one guy who works in the laundry with them. One of them was an accountant to Slugworth.
Yes. Which his name was... I just saw it here. Abacus Crunch was his name.
Yeah, I'm like, Crunch. I'm like, Crunch bar. But anyways, besides that, he said he was an accountant and how he got trapped because he wanted a cheap place to live. I'm like, you're an accountant, And I'm like, I get it, difference between lawyers and accountants, but still, your profession, you need to look at the letters and numbers. Why didn't you do that?
Yeah. So... Because he'd been away from his family for quite a while.
And turns out, when he was Mr. Slugworth's accountant, and it turns out Mr. Protnose, Figurgoober, and Mr. Slugworth, they are part of a secret society called the Chocolate Cartel. I'm like, oh, that's good. Have the kids to learn about the cartel with chocolate.
Yeah.
Imagine when they get older about the drug cartel.
Yeah. And Arthur Slugworth is actually the leader of the Chocolate Cartel.
Yes, and
he has a different identity, but we'll get to that later.
But here's the thing. Their whole underground base is underneath a church cathedral, and the priest who plays him is the guy who plays Mr. Bean. The priest's name is Father Julius, a corrupt, chocolate-addicted cleric in league with the Chocolate Cartel. His real name is Rowan Atkinson. But I like how a lot of these names seem to have something to do with either food or something with what they have done. Like, for example, Larry Chucklesworth.
He was the comedian dude.
Yeah, he knows how to speak underwater.
Yeah, then there's Piper Benz. I'm not quite sure.
She was the plumber.
Okay. And then Lottie Bell, which is
The phone operator.
the phone operator. So, yeah, they had names that were either, that had something to do with what they've done, or what they have done, or food, like Abacus Crunch.
Yeah.
Abacus is what they used to use, like those little things that look like, that have like the beads on them that you can move up and down.
Invented by the Chinese?
Yes, that was in the Abacus. And then Crunch. So, crunching numbers or crunch bars or whatever.
Yeah, yes, and turns out the chief of police is part of the little thing, and they pay him off with chocolate.
Yeah, so throughout the movie, you just watch him getting bigger and bigger and bigger,
fatter.
and it's hilarious.
And besides that, they're trying to figure out how they can sell Wonka's chocolate, and Crunch's like, look, you guys can, I don't want to wet on everyone's dream, but if you guys do this, we're going to get even more trouble. And Noodle just throws him a piece of chocolate. It's like, where do we start?
Yeah, and then that's when they start being able to go through the town and was able to sell off their chocolate without being caught by the police. Well, eventually they do earn enough money to open up their shop.
Yes.
Though I think before that, I think Lofty did show up. He was able to catch Lofty, and then we find out why Lofty has been stealing his chocolate.
Turns out he stole 3 cocoa beans.
It was the only 3 cocoa beans they had.
And it's from Oompa Land. And he sings the Oompa Doompa song in the other way, but it's like only way I'm stealing your chocolate because people from Oompa Land say they need, if you steal an Oompa Loompa, you gotta pay 1,000 folds. And he says 1,000 folds, meaning he has to steal his chocolate to get up to 1,000 things of chocolate.
Yeah.
And I'm like, it's 3 cocoa beans. How's that 1,000?
Yeah. So he ends up, he catches them, and then Lofty disappears. Lofty does show up a few other times throughout the movie.
Yes.
So we don't see him a whole lot.
Yeah, and the funny fact, Hugh Grant said he never liked playing the character.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, I think, like I said, he said he didn't care for the character. I think that's because he is a serious actor, and and if you don't know who Grant is, you're not from the 90s like us.
Yeah, he was very popular in the early 2000s, late 90s as a rom-com actor. So he did a lot of rom-coms, a lot of romantic comedies. He did, I think he was in My Best Friend's Wedding with Julia Roberts.
Cameron Diaz.
Yeah.
And I can understand this guy, and this film is a little goofy, and it's meant for families, kids, whatever. Mm-hmm. And I can see why he might not love the role, but I think but like I said, there's also controversy about the Oompa Loompas, but like I said, we're not going to get into that.
Yeah, because I mean, some people just thought that maybe a little person should have played the role of the Oompa Loompa. But, I mean, we can't say what the directors were thinking or what the producers were thinking.
Yeah. It could have just been that the directors didn't want to get into trouble because like during the 1940s, if they had to have a little person, they needed to get a little person from the circus. You get the point. We don't know, because there's some little people actors don't mind playing little people roles. But there's some that do. It just really depends on the situation.
Yeah. So I mean, we don't know what they were thinking on unless they just needed, because I mean, Hugh Grant's Oompa Loompa did look a lot shorter than normal little people.
Yeah.
So maybe they just went with an actor that they could just transpose their face onto someone who was shorter.
That could be too, but
so it could have been audition wise. Like we don't know.
Yeah, like I said, we're just stealing credit from that. But besides that, they get the shop, and they're still trying to figure out how to stop Wonka. And here's the thing: Slugworth goes to Mrs. Scrubbit and Mr. Bleacher, and she's in her robe. Well, I'm like, okay, it's a nice robe. And Mr. Bleacher is wearing that silk robe that's like really too short. I'm like, they should never make those. I don't care if it's for a man or a woman. They should not make those.
Yeah. I mean, well, was that before or after the shop caught fire?
It was before the shop, because what they did is when they opened the shop, everything was doing fine. Everything was going great. You could see the cherry tree they had actually looked like a cherry blossom in Japan.
Yeah, they were making a lot of money from it. And then people's hair started growing.
And
it turned out it was Yeti milk.
Yeti sweat, actually.
Was it Yeti sweat? I thought it was
Yeti sweat.
Milk.
Hang on.
I'm looking it up real quick. Just keep going.
Like I said, Yeti sweat. Everyone's getting really angry. Don't know why. And they kind of...
Okay, yeah, it is Yeti sweat.
Okay, get there. Like I said, everyone's getting pissed because they don't know what's going on with them. And they start burning down the shop. I'm like, you could have just asked for your money back.
Okay, so it says here, using the funds raised from selling chocolates, Wonka and the laundry workers opened Wonka's Dream Chocolate Store. The chief and the cartel, who are now unable to arrest him since he has a legitimate shop, expose him to Scrubbit. Infusing his chocolates with Yeti sweat, Scrubbit incites chaos among the customers, leading to the destruction of Wonka's store. Wonka reluctantly agrees to the cartel's offer to leave town by ship to pay off everyone's debt. Because of this, all the workers are released from the laundry except Noodle. Cartel leader Arthur Slugworth pays Scrubbit to keep her there indefinitely.
And we'll find out why they had to put her there. Leave her there, and Wonka's he's sad. He has to leave, and they said, they give him a ticket, and he's on the ship. Slugworth shakes his hand again, and Slugworth has like a tight grip when he shakes.
Mm-hmm.
He says, "That's a businessman handshake. That means you mean business." So he's on the ship. He's going to go to the North Pole or whatever.
Yeah, something like that.
And Lofty shows up, and he's like, "I'm not letting you out of my sight until I get the last thing of chocolate." And he's like, "Well, good luck. I'm not making any more." He's like, "You're going to follow what they're going to do. You should just fight back." And he looks on his hand because he's like, "Huh?" He's like, "What?" "Nothing." You said, "Huh." When you mean, "Huh," you mean something. And Lofty goes back to sleep. He's like, "Huh. Okay, what?" And turns out Slugworth let a print on his hand.
Yeah, because Noodle had been teaching Wonka how to read and write.
And it's...
At nighttime.
It hasn't... And his print says A, and the surrounding it is a bunch of S's. He says, "Yeah, it might be a family ring." And he realized Noodle has the same ring. And
he realizes that they're related.
Yeah, and he realized Noodles is in trouble. And he tells the captain to turn around, but there's no captain, and it's strapped full of bombs.
Yeah. And then, so they jump into the water and they swim back to land.
And Slugworth gives the chief police a big box of chocolate. And I'm like, dude, you're going to get diabetes.
See, I like chocolate. Mike doesn't. But I like chocolate, and depending on what kind of chocolate it is, I would be very happy with the big box of chocolate.
Yeah, but how they did it, they had to use a crane.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, dude, if you eat more, you're going to get diabetes and lose a foot.
Well, I mean, chocolate isn't as bad for you as you might think that it is. It's bad for you, but not as bad.
No, I get it. I know that, but I do know sometimes you do have to watch sugar and your weight.
Mm-hmm.
Because doctors will tell you you're going to get diabetes. But besides that, they,
Anybody see my foot?
Right. It's going to come like that.
That was from Family Guy, by the way.
It will come like that. It will, but besides that, it's the next day. Everyone's free to go from Mrs. Scrubbit.
Except for Noodle.
And she tells him how Mr. Bleacher ain't a lord. And she breaks up with him and calls him a peasant. I'm like,
yeah.
They make a good evil couple.
Yeah.
But besides that, she's in the pigeon coop.
Yes. So, let's see. So Wonka meets up with everybody and they save Noodle. And then they devise a plan to get the accountant book from the cartel to incriminate them and what was going on. So they use Abigail, which I think was the giraffe.
The giraffe named Abigail.
Yeah. So they go back to the zoo and they get Abigail, the giraffe. So once again, they give the security guard another piece of chocolate that puts him to sleep.
And Abigail likes Willy Wonka's mints that he makes.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, like, when he went to go milk her the one night, he says, giraffes always go crazy over my mints.
Yeah.
And what happened is, Noodle is dressed as a poor girl begging for chocolate on the street. He's like, I'm sorry, but I don't have any. Turns around and puts a little chocolate in his mouth. So Noodle puts mints in his coat, and they release a giraffe.
This was at the church, by the way.
Yep, and they release a giraffe at the cathedral.
Yeah, and they were supposed to be having a funeral later, too. But this actually got into, like, they had to, like, postpone the funeral. And it was a funeral for somebody really big. So Wonka and Noodle were able to infiltrate the cartel's base, where they are caught. Abacus Crunch was also caught with them. No, it was just Wonka. No, that was when he got caught. When Abacus Crunch, he got caught later or earlier in the movie. So it was Wonka and Noodle. They catch them in the base, and then they take him over to where they had all put their combined chocolate, and they put Noodle and Wonka in the chocolate, and they were basically going to drown them with chocolate.
Yeah, him and Wonka and Noodle, they were ready to die. He's like pulling out some stuff, trying to mix in with the chocolate. And she's like, "What are you doing?" He's like, "Well, if we're going to die by chocolate, face it, Noodle, we are. It's going to be Wonka's chocolate." And she tells him, like, "We just got to get to the top, laying on the grass, hopefully someone can help us."
Yeah, so it says here, using Abigail as a distraction, Wonka and Noodle infiltrate the cartel's base, where they are confronted by the cartel. Slugworth discloses that after the death of Noodle's father, his own brother Zebedee, he falsely reported Noodle as deceased to her mother, Dorothy Smith, and gave her to Scrubbit in order to eliminate her claims to the family fortune. Held at gunpoint, Wonka and Noodle are nearly drowned in a vault of chocolate, but Lofty rescues them.
Yes, and what happened is, before he left, before the cartel left, he tells him, like, "Here, can you give this to the little orange man?" And they're like, "Okay." It was like a last request, but they kept eating the chocolate, and they gave it to the cleric, and they were getting ready to leave. Wonka and Noodle scream for help, but it was pretty much the cartel, and the cleric says, "I don't know why you're getting so upset about it. It's only a piece of chocolate." Lofty comes, takes the jar, and be like, hits the freeze in the head with it, and he says, "If you steal for a Oompa Loompa, you pay 1,000 fools." Drains the chocolate, and they're like, "What happened?" And they see Lofty on top of the roof, whatever it is. Mm-hmm. And Noodle finally believes there was a little orange-green man.
Yeah. And they were able to get the chocolate to come out of the fountain in the town square. So then everybody was like able to have some chocolate.
Yeah, and makes up Wonka's chocolate. So the guys don't have so they don't use their chocolate to get them out of trouble. And they started to float away because they eat hover chocks. And they say, "Don't worry, they'll come down sooner or later." I think.
Yeah. So everybody's having some chocolate. And then Wonka finally takes out the last piece of chocolate that his mother gave him for his birthday. And he says, the secret is it's not the, or no. Okay, so it says, the public revels in tasting Wonka's chocolate. And Wonka unwraps the last chocolate bar his mother had given him, discovering a golden paper with a message stating that the secret is it's not the chocolate that matters, but the people you share it with. He splits the bar into 6 pieces to share with his friends before reuniting Noodle with her mother, Dorothy. He then settles his debt with Lofty and finds an abandoned castle for sale to start building his own chocolate factory with Lofty as his tasting tasting chef. Sorry.
Yes, and when they did that, like, well,
I got chills.
same here. But besides that, and that's the end of the movie. And it has, and before you during the credits, they have these little scenes talking what happened after the, after the Wonka's friends, Crunch went back to his family. The comedian Chucklesworth went back to being a comedian. His ex-wife came back, took him back. Piper went back to her plumbing job with her friends. The telephone operator, same thing. And Scrubbit and Bleacher
got arrested.
And they were drinking all the stuff that Wonka had on him.
Mm-hmm.
And they became hairy, different, like blue and green.
Says Wonka's friends return to their old lives. Scrubbit and Bleacher attempt to eliminate the evidence of sabotaging Wonka's shop, which disfigures them, and they are arrested for their complicity in the cartel scheme.
Yep, and now I have to say, I love the movie. I give it like a 10 out of 10. But
I give it like a 9 out of 10.
I can see that. There were some parts that didn't make sense. But
yeah.
Besides that, I love the music. You can tell this was a family film from the get-go.
Yeah.
From the get-go, you could tell. My favorite songs were It's Chocolate and the first song and the Chocolate Shop song.
I mean, I didn't really have like any particular ones that I really liked. But yeah, so I really enjoyed it.
And I do like how the ending song, they did use Imagination from the Willy Wonka movie.
They did, yeah.
And they're like, what? I'm like, okay, by that, I'm not talking about John Lennon's Imagine. I'm talking about Imagination. Go watch Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. You'll find out.
Yes, he sings this song when they're in the garden with when the children can run around and eat the food or eat the candy that's around. Which, fun fact on that is that was the first time the kids were actually seeing that area because they wanted the kids to be surprised. So the looks on those kids' faces are actually pure, unfiltered joy at seeing all of the candy, because I don't think you can manufacture or act joy the way that you saw on those kids' faces. It's like what they did in Harry Potter when the first years first entered the Great Hall. The looks on their faces were genuine.
Oh yeah,
because that's the first time that they saw it. So the looks on the kids' faces in Willy Wonka, that's the first time that they're seeing it, and it's actually genuine.
Yeah. Also with the Goonies, where there's a part in the Goonies where they see the ship, One-Eye Willie's ship for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
That was actually pure, because they didn't see the ship yet. That was pure surprise, but they had to cut some of it because they cursed. They were cursing, and they didn't. Yeah. Spielberg didn't like that, so they had to cut some parts. Had to redo it.
Yeah. So that's the song. That's the ending credits is the song in that when the kids see that, and he is just singing about how it's just pure imagination, how they'd never seen something like that before.
Yeah, and And like I said, I love the movie. I just don't. When the movie wasn't even coming out yet, people were watching the trailers. They said it was never going to do any good. People said they watched it, they hate it. I'm like, I looked on Rotten Tomatoes and other comedic stuff. In my opinion, I get it. It's your opinion. That's all that matters.
You want me to look up the rating on Rotten Tomatoes?
Yes,
Okay.
from both score. Hang on, guys.
Okay, so it got an 82% from critics and 91% from audience.
Yeah.
So, yeah, right there,
I don't get it.
the audience says, as long as you go in ready to take it on its own terms, Wonka is a funny, heartwarming musical that dreams up a new origin story for a classic character.
Yeah, and I get it. Like, I get it. People are prone to the old stuff, dude. I get they don't like prequels, because I get it because of the Star Wars universe. But besides that, I get it. But I like it. I think it's good. I don't know why people were so butthurt about the movie. I'm like, some say they saw it, they say it wasn't good. I'm like, okay, that's your opinion. But I get these people who say, I haven't seen it, I don't think it's good. I'm like, well, how can you say it's good if you haven't seen it?
Yeah. So, I mean, like I said, there were some cheesy moments in it. I mean, that's expected from a family film. But I give it a 9 out of 10. I actually enjoyed it a lot more than I thought I would.
Yeah, and it made back its box office debut, and it did great. But like I said, do I think it's going to be a sequel? I don't think so. But if there is, I'll be surprised.
Yeah, I don't think there is going to be a sequel because, I mean, then the sequel would just be Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory or Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
If they did, it would just be it'd just be like he has his factory, then spies would come in, then he'll close it at the end.
I would actually like to see that.
Well, you never know. We don't know, but
because they could bring Arthur Slugworth back. Because I mean, a Noodle isn't going to have claim to that because now she's with her mother.
Yeah. So either way, we don't. If they did, kudos to them, but I doubt there will be. But we don't know because, like I said, people don't like Warner Brothers because of the DCEU.
What they did with Johnny Depp.
And I'm like, okay, I get you guys' frustration. Why are you not being mad at the Disney, at the MCU? Because they are fucking making crappy movies right now. Mm-hmm. But they don't want to admit to that shit.
Well, we're not going to get into that.
Still.
You've already done your rant on that.
Go to that if you haven't seen that.
Yeah. But other than that, like, we have nothing else that we can really talk about with the movie. It was, I mean, it's on Max.
You can go on Max.
So if you want to check it out, just go to Max and check it out. It was really good.
You know what's funny? I went to Max. They got these, like, number lists, like the number one.
Yeah.
I went on there. It was, like, 1 week, it was, like, the number one thing people to watch.
Yeah. So, I mean, the people who were just being butthurt about it was probably trolls, just wanting to stir up shit.
I like some trolls that are just in it to make jokes. I like those, but there's some that are just like, I hate this, you suck. I'm like,
yeah,
dude, if you're going to be like a troll like that, go to Call of Duty and troll people.
Yeah.
And also, I always want to do this to one of those people on Call. If I'm playing Call of Duty online, and if they say
you don't play Call of Duty online.
Let's just say I did, right?
Uh-huh.
And they say I'm going to bang your mom, and they get pissed. I'm like, oh, so you're a necrophiliac.
Yeah, in case you guys didn't know, Mike's mom's dead.
So if you're going to say I'm going to bang your mom, it's like, oh, so you're a necrophiliac.
Yes. So every time at work, if Mike says something, I can't say that's what your mom said last night. I say that's what your dad said last night. Because I can't make mom jokes because his mom's dead.
Because it wouldn't make sense.
So, and he's such a good sport about it too. So,
oh yeah, I'd be like, "Ayo."
Yeah. So, anyways, let's go ahead and give next week's hint. Next week's hint is mannequin. Yeah. So, we're getting back into anime, so just think about what could have mannequins, okay?
Yep.
So, other than that, that's pretty much it.
All right. Goodbye.
Bye, guys.